Welcome, everyone, to Interreligious Environmentalism, Confronting the Climate Crisis Together, a panel event hosted by the Institute for Islamic, Christian, and Jewish Studies. My name is Katie Yost. I'm the Operations Associate here at ICJS. The mission of ICJS is to dismantle religious bias and bigotry by building learning communities where religious difference becomes a powerful force for good. In addition to religious diversity, Maryland has immense ecological and biodiversity. With our estuary, the Chesapeake Bay, the mountains, rivers, streams, and land features alike, it's imperative that our communities are collaborative in our response to the climate crisis. Today, I'm excited to introduce our four panelists: Joelle Novi, Executive Director of Interfaith Power and Light, DC, Maryland, and Northern Virginia; Matthew Lowe, LCPC at Chesapeake Mental Health Collaborative and the Center for Nature-Informed Therapy; Reverend Dell Hinton from the Arlington Lewin Gwynn Oak United Methodist Church, who's also the president of the Central Maryland Ecumenical Council; and Bonnie Sorak, Interim One Water Partnership Director at Interfaith Partners for the Chesapeake. These are all leaders and representatives of our community, and they will be sharing their insights into the work and ways that all of us at the end of the day can get involved. As we all sort of fill into the Zoom room, I'm excited to pass things off to Joelle Novi, who's going to ground us in the moment before we dive into our panel questions.
Thank you. Let's start by acknowledging whose land we're on today. We acknowledge that this land is the traditional territory of the Susquehannock and Piscataway peoples. Their presence is imbued in the lands and waters surrounding us. May we nurture our relationship with our Indigenous neighbors and the shared responsibilities to their homelands where we all reside today. I want to invite us to start by just remembering where we are in this moment in time. So much of what we do at Interfaith Power and Light is sit with folks in circles of folding chairs in their congregational basements and just ask what's happening to our world and what are we called to do about it. And by way of opening with that question, I'm going to play a piece of cello music where there is one note for each year of global average temperature for the last several hundred years. We, as we all know, but sometimes avoid thinking about, are burning fossil fuels for electricity and some of our animal agriculture and transportation is pouring heat trapping climate pollution into our atmosphere, causing our whole Earth to warm. I invite you, as we hear this piece of music, to open our time together to think about some of what you've heard, what could happen if we don't do anything about this, if we continue to pour heat-trapping climate pollution into our atmosphere, causing our Earth to warm. take a deep breath. So let's turn together to the challenge we all face, of people of all backgrounds, of all faith traditions, because we share this one common home, which is that we are the first generation to be experiencing the consequences of a damaged climate, and the last generation that will be able to do anything about it. And with that, I'll hand it back to Katie to think about how we're called to respond.
Thank you so much, Joelle, for sharing that cello piece of music, and for grounding us in this moment. Having just reflected together at what's stake, I'm hoping to hear from our panelists. What was a moment that you felt the call to address environmental degradation and environmental injustice? And I'm hoping maybe, Bonnie, if you feel comfortable to start us off, but to all panelists, feel free to chime in when feels appropriate.
Yes, sure. So I appreciate being here today with everyone. So I was reflecting and appreciate the conversation and the question. Having grown up in inner city New York, in the city, I was blessed to be able to spend my summers up in the Catskill Mountains, and was a free range kid wandering around in the woods. So just grew up with a great appreciation of everything that nature has to offer. Fast forward more decades than I'd like to name here. I'm thrilled to have this position with Interfaith Partners for the Chesapeake, and I received a phone call from a faith leader, a lay faith leader at a congregation, a predominantly Black congregation in Baltimore City. It was my first conversation with this woman, and she was in tears. And she was so upset because her congregation was leading trash cleanups in their neighborhood. And she said, we would do a trash cleanup on Sunday, and when I would come back to church on Monday, there was more trash. And she said, I don't, and the way she put it was, I don't know what's wrong with young people trying to lay the blame of this environmental degradation at the feet of younger generation. And, I listened to her for a while, and I said, I hear you, but what I also know is that because of my age, I grew up in a time when there wasn't disposable items, where there weren't single-use plastic bags, there weren't single-use drinking containers, right? So, this problem is not to be put at the feet of our young people. This is a systemic corporate off-putting of the responsibility for the end use of products that are from the petroleum industry that are being hoisted on communities. And what we say at IPC is do unto those downstream as those upstream do unto you. All the pollution that's in our watersheds flows down and ends up in inner city Baltimore. So it's not fair to blame these communities on what ends up in those communities, both from a corporate level and just because of the way watersheds are. So, and I don't know if I can share my screen. I just want to, we were working in a Oliver community in Baltimore, and we were doing a preparation for a nature walk. And just to show you what I saw that day, this is a storm drain in inner city Baltimore. You can't see the storm drain because it is completely covered in the trash. And this community is just inundated with this trash. And in that moment, and there's so many moments in doing the work that I do, you realize there's so much work that we need to do to provide healing in these communities. And it shouldn't just be on them to solve this problem. It's going to take all of Thank you.
Thank you, Bonnie. That's quite an image to kind of sit with here. And I think really helps sort of spell out the multifaceted and sort of all of the different layers that are at play here. Reverend Dal or Matthew, is there anything on this question that you all would like to chime in on?
Hi. I grew up here in Maryland and basically on the west side of Baltimore. And my father's family is from Howard County, but they lived in a log cabin and they had outhouses and a creek of water that went through their area. And I was always fascinated with how the water stayed clean coming from his home to our relatives further down the creek. And so that stayed a part of me and wanting to figure out why we can't keep things clean, because that was very important in our community with our relatives, that we didn't pollute each other, that we kept disease from happening from family to family. And how could someone living in a log cabin be able to do that kind of environmental care and have that justice for all in the community? As time went on, and we won't talk about how much time, as time went on, I became more and more interested. But finally in 2013, a little bit before that, Rabbi Nina Beth Carden came to the Ecumenical Leadership Group and spoke to them about environmental care and the need for an amendment, and more so about greening our earth. Central Maryland Ecumenical Council picked up the call, and we established Awake and Arise as a 2 to 3 day seminar discussing the issues around environmental care and whether or not, and exactly what our denominations were doing with it, and more specifically, what were our congregations doing in turn with those issues. And it's become a clarion call for me to personally do something. Our local church, Gwen Oak United Methodist Church, has put in rain barrels, is working on doing all kinds of work in our yard to address some of the water issues that we have. And we're constantly looking for an opportunity not to just clean up our churches, but to convey that information to each other individually and how we can live in an environment that actually gives back to us. One of the things that I'm real clear about is if we take care of creation, creation will take care of us. And if we're not caring for it, it's not caring for us.
Thank you. Just before I go, I really appreciate that. So I'll just say a little bit about where I'm coming from. I'm speaking not exactly from the religious community standpoint, but as a psychotherapist. I'll name sort of two major influences on me in terms of things that made sort of emotionally clear for me the impact of nature, our relationship with it on things like mental health and our identity. So my two references, one, I don't know if I feel weird about it, but the Grateful Dead song Throwing Stones has a lyric about we might leave this place an empty stone, which is just a really powerful emotional line. And then in divinity school, I took this sort of, for me, life-changing, eye-opening class on ecofeminism and the book Woman and Nature by Susan Griffin. Really, I mean, especially as a male, it was a book that, at some point had to be introduced to intersectionality and understanding how the earth gets sort of lumped in and spoken about in the same way as women historically. So both of those were just, they hit home and they inform my work.
Yeah, thank you all for all of that. It's, I think, really interesting to hear all of the different motivators and ways that even a song lyric or your lived experience growing up can really tailor sort of what you're passionate about and what you care about. And I'm really excited with this panel too, to really focus on our Baltimore area faith community. So I'm hoping for our next question to kind of dive into sort of telling stories or sharing stories of where you've seen Baltimore area faith community members sort of come together, meet the moment in the time of environmental need.
So I can start with one story and just kind of continue in the same light. I'm going to share my screen again really quickly. The same walk where I found that trash, there was also this sign in front of an elementary school. This is in the Oliver community in Baltimore City. And here's a sign. It says, "These trees represent our children's growth. Please respect their future." And there were no trees growing there. The trees that had been planted there had died. And no one had taken the time or invested the effort to replace those trees. And the woman that was in that picture is a wonderful volunteer with Interfaith Partnership of Chesapeake. She's a member of Knox Presbyterian Church. She's their green team leader. And they have at their church installed a beautiful mural. I'll find that picture too and share it with you in a little bit. Mural showing creation, the story of creation. They're on Eden Street. Their vision when we first started working with them was to have a garden on Eden Street, so the Garden of Eden on Eden Street. So in the last 6 years, they have worked to install the mural. They have worked to install a pollinator garden to bring more of God's creation, to welcome more of the amazing creatures that the butterflies and bees and things that are needed to have a healthy environment, welcoming them into the community. And I'm happy to say that we planted 2 new trees in this spot where the trees no longer were there. So that church as a cornerstone in this community has really answered the call to care for creation and to bring the glory of God into the neighborhood and helps the neighborhood to celebrate what can be and to be those visionaries. And what our model is, they model that behavior, that they show everyone, well, you may live in a row house, but you have a planter out front. You can plant a native plant in the planter. So showing people the way so that everyone can do something. So helping people to find the one thing that they can do, and being that conduit of information within this community that has suffered so much. But people of faith tend to be hopeful people and trying to make positive change. And I think that they really exhibit that quality. So that's what's there. I'll search for that.
Thank you for that story.
Jill, did you have a story to share? Or should I go?
Oh yeah. Okay. Whoever would like to take it, it's theirs.
Yeah. So as I pull up my thing here. So what motivates me in this work, I also grew up in the Baltimore area in the Jewish community. And even though, our traditions don't explicitly anticipate the climate crisis, I do get from the Jewish tradition a fierce spirit of intervention that we have to do what we can, even when the outcome is uncertain. And if life may be at stake, we have to get involved. And so we do lots of work where the outcome is uncertain and we don't always win. But I do want to tell briefly a story about some work we did in Baltimore that was a great experience and a great example of how faith communities lend distinctive value to these fights. And also, in this case, we did win. So we learned from some partners that that there were oil trains bringing oil through Baltimore City from the Port of Baltimore, like through residential neighborhoods. And that even though you can't regulate interstate commerce, the city could, by banning a certain kind of terminal, effectively keep these trains out of these residential neighborhoods. And we chose to bring a kind of a faith partnership to this campaign by, first of all, by framing it as a moral issue. So we found this quote from Maimonides, great Jewish sage, that says, if there's any object which could cause danger, especially danger that could, kill someone, you're required to remove it from the public space. And so we raised this as an issue of like, it's creating direct danger for people who live in these neighborhoods. And then we created a faith leader sign-on letter where we invited faith leaders. And the way this really works is that the people in the congregations, the green leaders, we call them the green sheep, get their clergy to sign these letters. So it's really leadership from the grassroots. We created a sign-on letter for faith leaders from Baltimore City, inviting them to speak out to the council in support of getting these trains out of the city. And we first talked about the direct danger to their own communities, and every name that's bolded on this sign-on letter means that their home or their congregation is within the blast zone. In other words, was directly threatened by these trains coming through their communities. But then we expanded and talked about a bigger idea of facilitating fossil fuel burning in the rest of the country, like participating in fossil fuel infrastructure was itself putting a dangerous object in our community because it's endangering the whole world to continue burning fossil fuels. So we started with this direct environmental justice concern that was very close to the ground and very local, but we expanded the idea to make sure we were also speaking about the larger problem of continuing to facilitate fossil fuel infrastructure in Baltimore. Rabbi Berg from Beth Am had a version of that letter appear in the Baltimore Sun, again, inviting his colleagues to speak out and making it really personal about the fact that he said the bedtime prayer with his children, in a neighborhood that was, in the blast zone and directly threatened by these trains going through, and that people always ask him if he feels safe living in Baltimore City, and they're implying something, racist about his neighbors, but actually the thing that makes him feel unsafe is these environmental justice threats. He feels very safe living with his neighbors. And ultimately, Rabbi Berg testified. We had a rally out front. That's on the bottom. There's a Catholic priest up top right speaking out. Ultimately, the bill passed. And when the bill sponsor talked about why the bill passed, she said that one of the critical elements was that so many faith leaders of different traditions raised it and made it a moral issue and reframed the effort to keep oil trains out of the city as a matter of right and wrong and caring for our neighbors.
I also am going to share my screen, and I hope I can get this right. Let me see. Yeah. One of the things that happened for us is that we are ecumenical, but we are definitely open to hearing other faiths and other traditions. And as Rabbi Nina Beth Carden came to the ecumenical leadership group and pushed them and prodded them and made them aware, we realized that every one of our denominations either had or were in the process of doing some kind of statement, resolution about environmental care. The question was how much of that had filtered down from the leadership into the actual congregations themselves, and what were people doing? As a result, as I said before, we had a training event and an event in which we found ourselves informed by those who had gathered with us about the things that we were doing and the things that we could do. In 2015, we launched a program in which we were able to bring together folk from all over to have this discussion. Our goals by the end of 2016 were to accumulate over 50,000 actions of collective intentional sustainability behaviors in 50 days. We didn't quite meet that goal, but we made an impact. And we got the congregations to talking about what it was that they were actually doing. One of the things that I can't quite pull up on here is that the Interfaith Partners for the Chesapeake and IPL were our partners in this. And they began to track individually within our congregations and resourcing them. And I'm talking about all the major Protestant denominations were made available to this and having a conversation about what could be done. This was the beginning of our activities, and I really want to emphasize that it is not enough for us to understand as Christians salvation as it pertains to humans, but our understanding of salvation also pertains to all of creation. That salvation, our individual salvation, is also coupled with the salvation of creation. And that was something that was definitely lifted up and continues to be lifted up. We are pleased to say that after all of that effort, that each one of the denominations has some kind of resolution in place, has some kind of working group in environmental justice, has some kind, and makes consistent statements on environmental justice in our community, not just in Baltimore City, but at the state level, and are willing and able to advocate in those areas.
Thank you. It's so exciting to hear about organizationally and sort of seeing Baltimore come together. Before I work into my next question that sort of focuses on justice and environmentalism in Baltimore, I actually want to step a little bit back. And Matthew, with your sort of different kind of lens here and different expertise, I'm curious also if maybe you could note a little bit on outside of activism and sort of that line of work of faith community showing up, how sort of what the mental health aspect, and is there work to be done there as well to then better the activism work?
Sure, thank you. So I realize in my my name I put here CMHC Chesapeake Mental Health Collaborative. I'm actually much more here representing sort of a part of that, which is the Center for Nature-Informed Therapy. So our mission is focused on recognizing and helping both clients individually and groups start connecting how their relationship with, or sort of a dearth of connection with nature, is a major factor in one's mental health. It's, I don't know what I want to call it. I want to call it something that's either sort of pre-activism or something that's, I think needs to be interwoven with activism. That for me, and I believe with other people, it's the kind of experiences that we have in nature, right? The actual being surrounded by it, the kind of ways it makes us feel, these kind of growthful, healing experiences that for a lot of people can inform and fuel their activism, right? That's, I don't know. That's sort of one way I'll put it.
No, that was great. Thank you.
Katie,
sorry,
if I could just jump in, because I don't know that I told the story that you were expecting me to tell. I thought we were going to put up the slide of Islamic Society of Baltimore. So if I could just briefly just kind of highlight their work as well. And I don't know if someone on your end can pull that up. I have it up on my screen. Up to you guys. There you go. Yeah, so I just wanted to raise some of the work that's been done. The Islamic Society of Baltimore, this is a photo that was taken. They're located in Baltimore County, just in the Security Square area off of Johnny Cake Road. So this congregation originally contacted IPC. They were trying to do some stream cleanups. They have a stream, I don't know if you can see, running right through their, right in front of their congregation, right where that triangle is right there. There's a stream. So they literally have the stream running through their property, and they see the trash. There's a fence there, so the trash gets piled up along the fence, and so they were having difficulty stewarding their own property, and we're looking for help in doing that. So over a course of the last 6 years, we've worked with this congregation, and this is a picture of 2 years ago, I believe, at Ramadan, which we're in Ramadan right now, which one of the wonderful celebrations when they get together for iftar dinners, this congregation can get upwards from 10 to 15,000 people that come for iftar dinner. So this was during COVID, so they were doing a drive-through iftar dinners. So you can see all the cars lined up there waiting to participate in their COVID-friendly celebration. But just shows the influence over time. We have worked with them. We've done stream cleanups there. Just last week, I think you have pictures going forward. That's the mosque. We're working on a stormwater design to put pollinator plants on the front of there and to make this a more friendly place. Next one. And then in the bottom left there, you can see it, left and top left. Last week, we worked with their 8th grade class and planted over 40 trees on site to work with the youth, so that, going back to that, the idea of planting hope and working with the youth to say, yeah, this is a problem, but there are ways that we can all work together to fix this, and to show that, over time, this congregation has just applied for close to $1 million grant to do stormwater retrofits in their parking lot. So because they know that what they're doing on site is affecting the water quality and the environment around them. So just want to raise that up as just what congregations can do and how much influence they can have when they take this on. Thank you.
Thank you, Bonnie. Thanks so much for uplifting that story. And I think that's a really great segue with what you were saying too about the water. And I'm hoping that maybe briefly we could all touch on, sort of in the context of Baltimore. That was a great Baltimore example. What does environmental justice mean for our communities here?
Well, I would like to step back for a moment and talk about 30 years ago. 30 years ago, I was doing a peace camp at Martin Luther King Jr. Memorial United Methodist Church. If you can say it 10 times fast, you're automatically a member. Anyway, I had about 60 children in that camp, and it's right on the edge of Baltimore City, leading into Baltimore County. And part of what we did was to do some environmental work, and we talked about crabs because that's the thing of Maryland. And one of the things that I discovered in doing that with the children, we were asking them to bring things like hammers and nails and pieces of wood and making this and making that. We discovered that most of our children were not lived as renters. They did not own property. And it made me understand, as I went further into my studies, because I am working on doing studies and being an eco-womanist. One of the things that I discovered, particularly in the Baltimore area, is that about 50% of our residents are renters, which means that they have no agency with the properties, the lands that are around them. And they have little ability to actually do something about them without working through or against governmental things that are in place, corporations that are in place, landlords that are not responding. So a lot of times when we start talking about environmental care, particularly in Baltimore City, we need to start to talk about who has agency to do these things, and also those who do not have agency, whether or not their concerns are about the water that is streaming through their community versus the water that they receive in their homes or in their schools or their place of employment. So the emphasis on environmental justice somewhat changes when you don't have agency. But I will also agree that it is very, very important to play in dirt. So one of the things that we have done is to also give ourselves an opportunity to partner with Blue Water Baltimore and planting trees and getting out as many people as possible to plant trees on our church property and in the property in our community in Howard Park. So even though they may not have agency there, we're trying to give folk agency somewhere else where they are able to do this kind of work.
And I do want to share that my own understanding of what it means to think about this from an environmental justice lens has expanded and deepened over my learning from my various teachers. And that, I think at first I understood it as just like, well, social injustice, is related to who, unequal access to natural resources, or, environmental problems are disproportionately harming those who are also disadvantaged by other systems. But I was really moved by a teaching from Hop Hopkins, who's a leader at the Sierra Club, who says, you can't have climate change without racism, because climate change, the idea of climate change and the idea of a fossil fueled economy requires that there be places that get totally destroyed by that pollution, or places that get where that trash is thrown away. And to have those places be totally despoiled by our economy means that we have to decide that those places aren't worth caring for. And that means we have to decide that the people whose home places they are don't matter. And they're disposable places means that we also have decided that those people are disposable. And that the idea of disposable people is racism. And so that, for me, that has been transformative in understanding that, and this is what Pope Francis says in the encyclical, there's not a social crisis and an ecological crisis, there's only one crisis. That the fundamental failure to understand that all human beings deserve, have dignity and sacred importance and deserve to have their home places protected, will unlock the solutions to all of our problems. And that these are fundamentally a unified challenge to, that we cannot address the climate crisis if we do not address the racism that makes it possible.
Thank you. I'm seeing so many wonderful questions come through the chat and on my page. So for the sake of just acknowledging those questions, I'm going to start asking some of those. The first one I have from the audience is Reverend Hinton. You mentioned working on being an eco-womanist. Can you explain more about what that means?
Well, first off, you have to understand what womanism is. And I could take your entire time to do that. But womanism is about having a hermeneutics of suspicion, understanding that everything that has been said to us and taught to us is not necessarily what God intended. And to understand that we need to reclaim our voices. It is not strictly about Black women, but it is about Black women. It is about eliminating gender issues, the way that we look at each other, and all of that. Now, let's get to the econo. One of the things that I'm real clear about is that Earth gives birth, women give birth, and we have neglected both the Earth and women. And what that does is a mentality that we have about that we're throwaway, and that it doesn't matter how we're cared for. So in my discussion around eco-womanism, it's about how do we care for the earth, that the earth can continue to produce? How do we care for women, that women can continue to produce? And not just produce to better society, but to better creation, so that creation continues to give. But we have to care for creation for it to give. The waters that flow, the air that we breathe, if we're not caring for the soil, the food that we eat will not be good. If we're not caring for how we treat the soil, we can develop, for lack of a better word, a cancer in our midst that will eat up everything. So there is a strong desire to understand that women are just as important as men. And the care for us and care for the earth is as important, if not more than important, than profit. And that's what moves me along and keeps me going. I hope that answered their question.
I think that was a great, I think I learned from that question. So thank you for sharing. I have another question. Bonnie, I saw you came off mute. So if there was something that you wanted to, okay. So the next question from our audience for Matthew, one of our attendees mentioned that sometimes prescriptions are given to people advising them to spend time in nature. And someone else mentioned reading that nature has a deep spiritual impact on people. Could you talk a little bit more about the spiritual aspect of nature and how that may connect to mental health and the need for us all to protect the environment?
Sure, gladly. If it's okay, I want to start by addressing this sort of prescription for nature thing, because here at the Center for Nature Informed Therapy, we've really, I think, expanded that in a number of ways. So especially in regards to doing nature-informed therapy through Zoom, which in some ways sounds like, okay, I'm staring at a screen and I'm inside of a room. How would that even work? I'd be proud of it, but I didn't put it up. You notice my backdrop in the room, and clients have commented on the way that even just this image impacts sort of the flow of our conversations. So things like that. We have a whole course called Embracing Winter that for a lot of people is a particularly difficult season to connect with, and people usually, seasonal affective disorder. And so that's also another program in which we are trying to help people connect for their own mental health. Regarding spirituality, I think that again comes up a lot in our trainings and in our work is the power of awe and wonder. Because I'm not sort of representing a religion here, I'm taking these two very spiritual experiences and broadening them, even to almost a secular context. That these are emotions that relativize our experiences, that allow us to see ourselves in the context of something bigger than ourselves, which, for me is again, a very broad, non-specific definition of spirituality. That this kind of connection, this kind of defusing from feeling utterly wrapped up in ourselves, all of these things are, I think, sort of the spiritual power of nature to enhance and just help our mental health. So yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. Bonnie and Joelle, I'm going to throw this one towards you all first, just to uplift some voices. I'm going to blend two questions together, but sort of in the work that you've done and the people that you've met, what have you learned about a religion different from your own? And how has that inspired you? And I'm also sort of blending that with kind of where are your own religious values and how do those motivate you?
I'll jump in there first, if I can, Joelle, if that's all right. So I would say, and again, I really appreciate this conversation. In the work that we do, I come across so many. I'm Jewish by faith. I'm a member of Columbia Jewish congregation in Howard County. And so that really grounds my belief that one of the tenets of our faith is that we are God's hands on earth, that it's up to us. We're here, we're put here to be stewards and we're to do that work. So, but I get to work, as I mentioned before, I work with Muslims and Christians and Sikhs and Buddhists. So I learned so much whenever I go to visit one of my congregations. And what I'm struck with is about how we're more alike than we are different. And so when I sit in and I watch rituals of people of other faiths, I'm constantly saying, well, that's similar to what I experienced in this congregation, which is completely different from that. But there's an undercurrent of all of those same messaging within the different religions. So I just love when I'm invited in to visit other congregations to witness that and to participate in that. It's a blessing to be part of that. And if I could, before you start, I just want to jump off a little bit on something that Matthew was talking about. We work really closely with a congregation in West Baltimore. It's Still Meadow Community Fellowship. They are blessed to own 10 acres of forested land that they're trying to restore. And when we talk about going into the woods, they have a youth program. And when they first tried to take the children from that inner city community into the woods to do a bird walk, the gentleman that was leading the walk realized that the children were afraid. They've been warned against going into the woods, that the woods were something to avoid, and for very good reason. That historically, going into the forest and just the whole idea of trees and the legacy of lynching follows our neighbors in these areas. So just to get children into the woods and feeling comfortable was step one before we could even do anything else. And just to really, two things about that: to see a 12-year-old inner city boy who had never walked through the woods before be brought into the woods, to then hold a captured bird. They were doing bird banding, to hold a bird in his hand and to see the transformation of this child, to see that this is the wonder of creation right here. And it's been here all this time, but he was cut off from that. To allow that spirit to enter this child. And what Pastor Michael Martin at this church says, they've learned a lot of taking what they do in the forest into the church, and what they do in the church into the forest. And so welcome everyone to experience that. And I can they have events there all the time, and welcome folks to participate.
Yes, Still Meadow is awesome, and I encourage everyone to check it out and come help. As I said before, I'm Jewish and grew up Jewish in Baltimore, and so did my dad. And we're involved multi-generational connection to Chizuk Emunah congregation in Baltimore County. And I think the image from my tradition that is the most resonant one for me in this moment of doing this work is from Genesis, where Jacob is actually ready to go to sleep for the night, and then he gets attacked by this strange adversary who fights with him all night long, and it's unclear who it is, mysterious attacker. He certainly wasn't looking for that fight, but he engaged it, and in the morning he said, I will not let you go unless you bless me. Right. So he insisted that this battle he didn't choose bless him in the end. And I feel like that's our situation as people, that we have been born into this generation where we are in the fight of our lives for a livable world. We didn't choose that fight, but we're in it. And I think we do have, we can insist that we wrest a blessing from this time and from being alive on earth in this moment. And for me, one of those is about recognizing that the things that might have seemed like big differences between human beings in the past, like faith tradition, aren't as important, are silly to keep us apart if we as human beings are all facing a common challenge. And we do, at the end of the day, like share a common home. I think the thing that is I've been doing this most weekends for almost 14 years in congregations of every tradition, sitting with folks in every kind of faith community that is in this region. And I think the enduring learning I've had is just what Catherine Hayo is a teacher in a scientist and climate communicator. And she says, you can never ask people to become someone else. You can only ask them to become more fully who they are. But everyone can respond to climate. Everyone is already who you need to be to take action on the climate crisis, because no matter who we are, we already have the values that we need to respond to this crisis. And we already, like all of us love somebody or someplace that will be harmed by the climate crisis. So all we have to do is fight for that which we already love and be more fully ourselves in that moment to respond to this crisis. And so I truly believe that everyone here listening today, every one of us, every faith community already, is who we need to be climate protectors, because we already have the values that call us to care for that which we love. And I just, if the climate, when the climate crisis starts to feel really daunting and dispiriting, I think I would just invite you to know, because I've seen it myself, that you are in such good company, that every type of tradition, every type of community in the Baltimore area and beyond, people are thinking about what is happening to our world and are responding with great integrity and compassion. And I just feel so lucky that, I feel like I have to be a climate activist, but I feel so lucky that I'm a climate activist in faith communities, because I get to dwell in the land of human goodness, where every single conversation is with someone who's trying to do right by their neighbors and to do right by the future generations and to do right by the natural world. And it's such an honor to be wresting a blessing from this fight with you all.
I'd just like to add that there's something that we've talked about in Peace Builders, which is another offshoot from CMEC, that we have to exercise our muscles on a regular basis so that when we're ready for a big fight, we automatically do it. And so one of the things that we need to do is to individually consider our own private atmosphere and what can we do. If it's just simply, making sure you do the recycling and that kind of thing so that it becomes second nature and you can start to pile on to that and you can get to the activism. You can speak without hesitating. Sometimes it seems daunting to be an activist because you don't know all the information. But if you know what you're doing in your environment and how it's affecting your environment, it translates into something much larger. So I just want to encourage everybody to realize that they don't have to go sit in front of, the city council. They don't have to go down to Maryland, to Annapolis to protest. What they can do starts with them, and that will expand it. And you'll be able to speak with a voice of confidence when you start exercising that muscle.
Yeah, well, I think that's a great segue, Reverend Dell. All of the panelists today have put together a list of different ways that with your agency that you can act today. So one of my colleagues is going to be, we're having some technical difficulties with poll. So they're going to be throwing that into the chat now. And I'd love to see in the chat how you would respond to those moments. And I'm just going to let that pour in for a moment, because I think Reverend Dell is right that perhaps you might not be the person sitting on the steps, but there are so many different things you can do to be involved and to take action today, this afternoon. Doesn't even have to wait for tomorrow. While that's all going in the chat, I want to also, I know Matthew, one of our panelists, is going to be departing to meet with clients and everything. So I just wanted to quickly acknowledge him and say thank you. Reverend Dell, was there anything else as people throw their personal agency in the chat that you wanted to add?
Just that, even just talking about it, reading stories with your kids, walking outside, asking them about the trees, asking them about the birds, what difference does it make? The stories that we tell, and getting them to actually breathe the air and understand how precious it is, I think is really important, and to do it intergenerationally. My goodness, I won't talk about how old I am, but things have changed tremendously in the years that I have been on this earth. And it is one of my greatest goals and my greatest joys is to take my 5-year-old grandson out to water the garden in front of our church. Simple. And he starts asking questions.
One of the things that comes up a lot around Earth Day is this, like, what can one person do? What is the one thing that one person can do? And the climate activist Bill McKibben says the most important thing that one person can do is not be just one person anymore. So I would invite you not only to think about these actions, but about, the insight behind everyone who's spoken today is that we do this work in community, and we beat back the hopelessness and despair by being together in it. So I would invite you also to think about getting connected with one group or a community that's going to call you to action in this over and over again. One of those on this panel or another one.
And even if you can't get into an organization, buy a plant that'll foster butterflies or bees or something along that line, that it's a part of the whole thing. Be a part. Take some time.
And if I could share just a closing, I know that I shared that disturbing image, so I wanted to share this hopeful, beautiful image. This is the mural and garden that was planted at Knox Presbyterian Church in the Oliver community. So this is, something, we started off with a beautiful musical piece. I think we can end with a beautiful piece of artwork that shows what a positive force faith communities can be in their communities for love and beauty and strength and growth and health, and hope that you all can find a place to put your efforts, whether it's to help weed a garden or call a legislator. There's a place for you to do something to help.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Bonnie. I love this image to kind of round out our multifaceted sort of visuals and audio today. Thank you all for joining us, and for our panelists for sharing their work with you all. We hope you've learned something, and I invite you to engage further in the following ways. When you exit this Zoom today, there'll be a prompt in your browser that will be a survey to this event. We deeply value your feedback and opinions on programming. And in this particular survey, there is also ways that we will collect information to then share contacts for Joelle and for Reverend Dell and for Bonnie to make sure that you all can connect and engage with their organizations. I think that that's really crucial here today. And if you want to learn more about ICJS or the panelists, you can visit our website at icjs.org, where you can also learn about upcoming programs or subscribe to the email list. We invite you to sign up specifically to learn about, we have a May course coming up with ICJS scholar Matt Taylor on Messianic Judaism and Christian Zionism, and a book discussion on May 17th with Goucher professor Ann Duncan on her new book, Sacred Pregnancy, Birth, Motherhood, and a Quest for Spiritual Community. And I also want to remind you that ICJS is a non-sectarian and independent. So we're unaffiliated with any academic or religious organizations. So we're supported at the end of the day by people like you. We strive to make all of our programming accessible at no cost, but that support that you give us makes that possible. So thank you again to our panelists. Thank you all for joining. Please definitely leave your information in the survey so that we can connect you with our panelists. But we hope you have a great afternoon, and maybe you'll check off some of your personal agency ways that you can be involved and take action.